it's difficult to discuss the referendum just in terms of what's happening today. One has to, I think, look at it from a longer, broader perspective. How do you view it from, given your background, your knowledge of the history of Ukraine within Europe, relations with Ukraine, between Ukraine and Europe? How does that tie into?
So I think that's a good question. I think what we are now at a very important turning point in Ukrainian history. Ukraine is a country that was, in essence, a colony of the Russian Empire since the 18th century. Later, it was incorporated forcibly into the Soviet Union following a long war and following an incredibly bloody and brutal 20 years of Sovietization in the 1920s and 1930s. Ukraine became independent when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, but maintained a complicated and not entirely equal relationship with Russia after that. When Russia became more and more, as it evolved into a kleptocracy and a much more authoritarian state, it began to try once again to impose its system on Ukraine after 2008, 2009, and and there was a clear result. Ukraine was impoverished by this relationship with Russia. It was deprived of its own identity. It was prohibited from having the kinds of international relations that it wanted to have, or that many of its citizens wanted to have. And what we saw in 2014 was a genuine revolution, an attempt by many Ukrainians not just to liberate themselves from Russian influence, because Ukraine has a deep and long relationship with Russia, which of course will never end, but an attempt to establish itself as a country which is not a colony and which is not a part of an authoritarian system, but is genuinely independent and has a system which it would call European rule, which respects rule of law, which has an independent judicial system, which has open trading relations with other European countries, and which is tied into the mainstream of European political and cultural life. And that's a long way of saying that the EU association agreement is about that. For the Ukrainians, it represents for them an aspiration. We would like to be more European. We would like less nepotism. We would like less corruption. We would like more rule of law. We would like more justice. And the agreement to them is a symbol of that. It would deepen their cultural and economic ties to Europe, and would enable them to become more like us, more like what they believe us to be. And that's why I find the story of the referendum in the Netherlands so strange, because it's hard for me to imagine why the Dutch would not want that. Would you rather have on Europe's eastern border a country which is chaotic and lawless, and which is and corrupt, or would you rather have a stable trading partner with whom you can do business, whom you can visit, who you can trade with in a normal way? I see absolutely no argument why a trading relationship with Ukraine is in any way bad for the Netherlands. I don't see why it's, I don't see why a vote against it helps the Netherlands in any way. The only loser really would be, is the Netherlands and of course Ukraine itself. I understand that this is all really about Dutch internal politics, but think for a moment about the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are, aspire to be more like you. I mean, that's what this is about. They aspire to be more like the Dutch. And so why wouldn't you want that?
And actually, to a certain extent, the discussion of, is Ukraine a European country, not a European country? I mean, looking at its history, it has always had a place in Europe. So.
Look, Ukraine aspires to be European, and it's very important for you to understand what that means. It doesn't mean they aspire to, they all are going to come and live here, or they aspire to, be a star on the EU flag necessarily. They aspire to a European ideal, which is one that you support. They aspire to rule of law. They aspire to democracy. They aspire to independent judiciaries. They aspire to prosperity. This is what they would like, and they identify Europe with these things. And that's why they want a trading relationship with Europe, much of the same kind of relationship that Europe has with many other countries. So, in that sense, yes, they're European. They want a political and economic system similar to that of Europe, and they have wanted that for many years.
And considering the fact that their geopolitical situation was determined by exterior influence, external influences, after both wars throughout much of its history, now it's basically being decided again.
Yeah, this is one of Ukraine's few chances to become a sovereign country, and to make its own sovereign decisions about who it trades with and who its friends are. And it doesn't mean that it's a rejection of Russia or that it's a blow to Russia, because Ukraine, of course, will go on trading with Russia, and it remains closely tied to Russia in many ways. But it would also like a relationship with Europe, and that's what the association agreement would give it.
What should Ukrainians, regardless of what the outcome of the referendum is, obviously Ukraine has to continue along its path, the path that it chose. What can it do to really overcome perhaps the potential disappointment of a negative result on the referendum?
Well, the negative result will feel to Ukrainians like a rejection. And again, people here know that it's about internal politics and it's really nothing to do with Ukraine, but it will feel to Ukrainians like, oh, we aspired to be like you, and you don't want us. And it would be a blow again to the forces of rule of law, the forces of justice, the forces of democracy, not only in Ukraine but all across that Europe. Remember what the alternative is. I mean, we can see what a Ukraine which is not tied to Europe looks like, because we can look at Donbass, we can look at eastern Ukraine, where there has been a Russian invasion and where the area is run by kind of unelected mercenaries who are in charge thanks to force and violence and not thanks to rule of law. And we can see what happens. You have chaos, you have disorder, you have planes being shot down out of the sky. This is something that should mean a lot to people in this country. You think it's all far away and it doesn't really matter, but a plane full of Dutch citizens was shot down in chaotic circumstances in a part of Ukraine that's ruled by Russian mercenaries. So a vote for the association agreement is a vote against chaos. It's a vote against war. A vote, the other way around. If you're voting to deprive Ukraine of European standards, then you're voting for the kind of chaos that led to your plane crash. So it's a mystery to me. It's mystifying, genuinely, as to why the Dutch in particular would vote in any other way.
So they should vote yes.
Absolutely should vote yes. There's no good argument for voting the other way. Even if you feel anti-European, if you don't like your government, even if you would prefer, the Dutch leave Europe, leave the European Union, doesn't matter. It's in your interests for Ukraine to be run by rule of law, for Ukraine to aspire to European values, for Ukraine to be part of, a wider family of democratic nations. That's all. There's no reason why you should be against that.